those issues of thinking in space, well, there's a lot of presentations on that today. It'll be part of the core dialogue. We now know we can put things in space. And Tim Apple, as I like to call him, kept talking about AR, not VR, being the future. And of course, both will have aspects of utility, but to be able to move around in the space, whether it looks like the real world or whether it has some fancy overlay, as long as you don't bump into things, it seems from our experience will be a great addition to sitting like at a desk and having the full workspace. So Andrew will be showing you full 360 workspace. And what Fabian was saying is the same here, and I need to emphasize this is real data, right? We do not like canned demos because it's so important to experience your own stuff. So what Andrew will be showing is two types of data. One is the book, The Future of Text, which is not finally published yet. So if you have a thought, a paragraph, or a section, do submit. There's a high chance we'll be able to squeeze it in there. And also the Hypertext Conference. So this was kind of amazing technically what they managed to do. The day before the Hypertext Conference launched, we managed to get the data, do the things, Mark Anderson sitting right there, waved his magic wand and worked all night and to get it into the headset. So when people were experiencing then, it was their own paper. I'll stop talking when you're ready, so.
Let me mention that this project is part of a 2-year grant that we received from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. And one of the things that we realized, we had divided the years into year 1 reading, year 2 writing or authoring. And what we started to realize as we were working on the reading part is you can't read without writing. So the writing kept sneaking in, right? And with the writing part, I imagine we're going to still be thinking about reading, right? So you can't really separate those two. But what you're going to see is what we've been producing for the reading part, right? So, you ready?
Should I just dive in?
Yep, dive in.
It should be working. The eye tracking is a little bit off because this is not calibrated for my face. But luckily, the space kind of takes over with its own tracking that we've coded in. So once I'm in here, it no longer is requiring the vision eye tracking, and it will operate the same here in the vision as it would on a Quest headset, which is for uniformity, I suppose. I can no longer see you guys though, so.
That's okay. We're looking at you.
All right. Do you want me to talk, or are you?
I was going to talk over. So
all right, go for it.
So one of the things I wanted, I'm imagining that I want a 360-degree experience. I want to be able to put things everywhere in this space. I don't like the confines of a desktop, and I don't like the concept of the desktop in VR space, right? So we're trying to break out of that space. So you're going to notice that you're able to kind of move things around, right? We can open up, we can select one of the titles, pull it off to the side. We can expand it and read it, so you might want to expand that, show them what it looks like. So there's the article you can read. You can move that out of the way. You can put articles side by side and be able to compare text. He's going to do that for us.
Trying to keep up.
Yep, there we go. There's references that are...
Neither of these have references.
Neither of those have references, but we have references.
Take a long I know yours has references.
Frode designed this interface, and what you're going to notice, there's this, Andrew, let's show them the slide out.
This part?
Yeah. So you can see that the information that you want to get to, the all papers, long papers, short papers, posters, workshop, by author, by institution, you can select any of those in the menu, right?
Which this, we're demoing right now the Future of Text Volume 5. So there's no posters or workshops in this library. But we also have some of the ACM conference papers which do include those. So it's designed to encompass most of what you'd have in a library. That doesn't mean every category will be filled with every library.
So you can continue populating the world around you, looking around to find the items that you want to read and access, closing them up by hitting the minus button.
I just want to say one thing for the benefit of those of you who haven't been in a headset. All this jiggling is because of Andrew's head. These items are rock solid in space. It's phenomenal. It's just like no movement at all. Just to emphasize that.
And you're touching. We're not using controllers. So there's that very visceral experience of interacting with text with your hands, right? Which is, I think, a really great experience.
So we're running.
You also are able to look at something and select it, right? So you're looking, selecting, and Andrew, I'd love for you to show the mono menu.
Oh yes, that's right here.
So this is something that we developed. You can see on his hands, his fingers, a menu that we can access.
So this would be for, this is some assistant stuff on here. So this would be if you're having trouble figuring out where you're pointing. You've got a
For the
line.
cheat sheets, just to also emphasize something that's so amazing, and it's so easy for us to forget because we've done it so much. When you do gestures, when you speak, you gesture, when you do it in XR, it's so often you get a false positive. So if you have like, this means something specific, chances are at some point you're going to do it by accident. But some people in the group, they figure out if you touch yourself, that's likely to be intentional. That's why we have a hand menu. If you touch your fingers, the system trusts you. Right? That's the kind of thing we'd never think of until we started building this. So the hand menu is not a detail, it's
So we
amazing.
call it the mono menu because mono for hand, but also magic.
Exactly.
You also get the soft haptics of actually your finger stopping when you touch something that you have visual feedback on as well. You're not poking a floating menu in space.
Okay, so actually, if I can speak to that really quick, this is almost the opposite of that. Because if you notice here, I don't know how well this will show, if I put my hands like this, they're touching, but if I do this, they aren't, because these hands are not your hands. These hands are a generic model that they track onto your joints. So depending on the user, touching things don't actually always make physical contact. So this is, it's got a snap feature where you're going to get close, but you don't have to actually touch. You can, of course, but it'll still work even if you can't. So that was an important discovery. I switched over to the ACM 24 library here just to show how easy it is. This is the same web page. We didn't jump to a different page or anything. I just changed the source data, so it's reading from a different JSON object right now. And I jumped over here because here we actually have lots of references, because this is a hypertext conference where these papers came from. So Dene, if you wanted to go back to talk about your references, I actually have them now.
Yes, so there's the references, and you notice that when he does that, we do have the string that attaches, so like a little hypertextual experience there. Eventually, what we're imagining is that we're going to be able to draw lines and point to things. So you have two texts open side by side, and then you can draw lines and find things that have connections, right? That will be part of the writing part, right?
The line part is because of our dear friend Ted Nelson. Most of you will know he invented the term hypertext. Outsized crazy genius.
With visible
With
links.
visible links.
Yeah.
With visible
Well
links,
said.
exactly. So when he looked at this, he said, yeah, whatever, who cares? It doesn't show visible connections. So that tiny little line that Andrew managed to put in at the last minute is an amazing potential for the future, but as you'll also experience, it can get messy. So that's why it only appears on moving, and we're looking at how to make these things more lines. Sorry, Dene.
Yeah, the worst thing possible is to have a net of lines, like just a tangle of them. So having them, yeah.
Yeah, I think it would be super interesting if they're not just lines, but they're actually encoding information like relationships, supporting, contradicting, citing. There's a lot of things you could do with it, and they can have different colors, and it could be extra information, and not just the links that a specific person put in, the author, but also allowing for the whole community to potentially make these links as well would make it very powerful.
Yeah, and Rob is going, yes, 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 behind you. But yeah, I mean, I think the thing that we've been talking about, when I taught hypertext class last year, we talked about how so much of hypertext has not been fully theorized. And part of what you're talking about is that. There's so much we haven't done yet with hypertext. It got swallowed by the web, right? Yeah. And the potential is far more than that. Yeah.
So if you hide the line trace between the actual source and the link that it's referencing whenever you place it, you can still have a solid visual connection between those two endpoints by making a mapping function. So even something as simple as shape, color, orientation can give you several dozen unique symbols that you can just say this box with the upside down orange triangle relates to that part of the text that has the upside down orange triangle on it. And then when you pick it up, it'll actually draw the line between them.
I'm imagining also space, because I'm teaching spatial computing this semester, and here's a whole table of my students sitting there. And we could think about how the distance, like where things are organized in the space, and how that could impact the way we think about that text and the relationships among those texts, right? So I think there's a lot of things we can tease out of this project as we move forward.
I'm so glad that that got picked up on, because when we're talking about next year authoring, we're not talking about just writing lines. We're talking about these configurations. How do you show the connections? How do you show the information? How do you show the relationships? And one of the things Fabian mentioned, which may have passed you by, it certainly did me the first few times I heard it, there are things that are configurations, layouts, that don't have any content. So that in itself is something. So you could imagine students handing in a paper, but that is a configuration, right? It's like this because of that, and it's the shape that matters, and that's very much what we're looking for next year.
Yeah, one thing that I was interested in is that when I sit at my desk, I have 6 objects in front of me, right? I've got a desktop I use for coding, one that I use for design, my iPad, which I use for news and mail and stuff, my iPhone, right, for people texting me or messaging me, and then also my headset, right? All of those are sitting around me, and I'm picking up things and moving them around, and the Apple system allows me to have them talk to each other. What I would love to have is one thing with all my space around me, right? And so part of my goal is to get rid of all those other objects and to live with one object, right? That object then could talk to my phone when I leave my home. Yes?
Just a quick note also, so the configuration of the object in space and the things, for example, when you drop an object on it, itself is malleable, is configurable, so you can grab the target spot where you're going to drop a thing that's going to be sent, for example, to another device. This itself is not as set in stone. This itself is part of the layout, so that, for example, if you don't just put the laptop there, or this book goes there, because for you, and again, it's for each person, it's personal relationship, I guess, to this spatial layout, but this itself is dynamic. This itself is based on how you think about this on your workflow. So it is dynamic too.
Yeah. Yes, Alex.
One thing I keep doing in my work when reading papers, they're typically mixed text and visual information. And that's all typeset in a linear fashion. Would be nice to explore, from my perspective, something where the visual information is somewhere here, where I can continue reading the text that is associated with that visual information. We already have the references, which is great, where reading the text, I can see the references and if necessary follow the references, but that additional stuff about a particular visual piece where a lot of text is associated with it, normally what I have to do now is always go back and forth.
Yeah.
So like having a second column where like the figures or the tables and charts are over here, but they're linked to what they associate to in the text, that you can go back and forth rather than have them in line.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, just a bit more on the design principle. So when I work with physical objects like paper on a table, I can just arrange them like that. And that's something we did even before computers, right?
Yeah.
And in a typical desktop scenario, I have my 10 apps open, my 10 tabs and everything. It's all on a small screen, but it would be nice to have it all in 3D. What do you think is the goal here, to go more towards this physical, real world metaphor, or like, solving this digital crowdiness?
I think there's several goals. I mean, I think what's interesting is that we have different interests, and we've come together to do this work. My interest is moving into the virtual and making the physical be able to be experienced in the virtual world. That's my interest. And then how to save that, how to preserve it, how to maintain things for perpetuity. Your interest is in text and how text behaves and how text can be enhanced and how text can function in these spaces. So I think, and also the physical. He's interested in the physical as well, but a different rendition of it, I guess would be said. But I think there's several goals here. But at the heart of what I'm interested in, what the project talks about, is what happens to us. I mean, my real interest is in the human experience. What do we as human beings get out of this? How is it going to change us? So when we move from orality to written text, things changed in our brains. We were not wired to read, right? That came over time, right? And now we're moving to this virtual space. We've been talking about the second orality for quite a while. I would argue that we're talking here about the third orality, Because once we're able to start using voice recognition and being able to use that kind of technology and AI, we're moving far away from even the second reality, right? And so that I find that interesting myself. Brandon.
In a trivial sense, reading in virtual reality only entails the legibility of text, being able to throw text up in any form, in whatever way. What you have here is obviously much more sophisticated, much more opinionated than that. What do you know about, what did you learn about, like, why is it more than that? What are the things that you get out of being more opinionated? Can you say a little bit about how we can construct things for more intentional sort of spaces and contexts toward a specific intent?
Do you want to answer first or me first?
I'm just going to say what she said, so please go ahead.
I personally need space. I can't work in a confined environment. And I find the working on a phone to be very difficult. I like big screens. I like a room that's large. I like that. And so I find that working in the virtual reality environment where I have 360 experience and the objects aren't paper, aren't two-dimensional. They actually have some sort of roundness and dimensionality to it. I can turn it over, manipulate it with my hands. I find that to be very profound, right? And it's changing the way I think about space to the point where I really have an even more difficult time with the phone. Do you know what I mean? When I get into, I love my Apple Vision Pro, and I can tell you that I can walk around the house and live in that. I don't get dizzy. It doesn't make me tired of wearing it. It's not heavy on my head. I can live in that headset. At the same time, when I take it off, I feel the confines of my room. So I think at the heart of what's happening to me personally is that very thing, the need for space, the need to be able to move around and have everything around me. The other day, someone recommended to me on Blue Sky to look at a work called The Morning That I Woke Up. It's about the story of Hawaii being with the bomb potential, 2018. And the entire narrative occurs in a three-dimensional space so that you're standing and cars are coming by you and you turn around and you can see them going off into the distance. It's not just you looking at a cinematic experience. You're not other. So that's the other thing, Brandel, is that the sense that we're no longer looking at a binary Cartesian world. I'm in that space. And as I argued last night, I'm also an object in the space, along with the text and images and all the other things that's happening around me. And so then that brings the question, does that dehumanize me? If I'm just an object, if I'm just a digital object encoded in zeros and ones, what does that mean? Does that mean I'm on the same level as an image? And so I think that's another question that we want to be thinking about as we're working in this space. How are human beings going to be presented and experienced in this space with each other? Frode and I can do spatial persona. As I'm seeing him online, we're little bodies, right, talking to each other. And it seems kind of spooky and ghostly, but at the same time, we're still humans in that space. So I think we're trying to find ways to humanize the space. Our project is meant to do this before the corporations dehumanize us. Does that make sense?
Yes.
We really want us to be thinking about how to embrace and save, preserve the human person in these virtual spaces before we become just objects. Yeah.
So, hang on. As I said, I would say what she said, because we're so on the same level on this. Just an additional thing is the notion of accessibility on a traditional computer is quite demeaning, right? Oh, you have a problem, we must fix it for you. In this environment, whatever your site preferences are, you should be able to be in that environment, specifying that, right? Do you want to work in a dark room? Fine, something trivial. Do you want your text to be this, that, and the other? Fine, it can be that, right? So the notion of accessibility becomes something entirely different. It becomes an empowerment or an augmentation. So the being in the space is something so core to what we are looking at. By the way, you're out of time for this, but now you started your next.
Yeah,
so it's
so
up to
we'll
you
just,
how many questions
Andrew's
you take.
getting me set up here, so I'm
Okay.
vamping for myself, but I'll keep answering questions. Yes, Dougie.
Yeah, I just wanted to presence the importance of data. So you're talking about people being persons and personhood within the virtual space. One of the key issues is the data that's going to be produced by us being in there, and it's really important from my perspective that we have data sovereignty, that we own that data, we control that data, and we are the only ones that can actually monetize that data.
Yeah, if my body becomes data in that system, I don't want Google to own my body, right? I mean, not that I'm angry at Google. I don't want anybody to own my body. I own my body, so it's a sovereignty. So did you want to say something too?
So I want to build on what Brandon was talking about, in that we can read in VR. We can pull up a file, we can open a web page, we can open an instant messaging app, and we can just read text in a headset. But that's, not a lot of people do that. And I think the reason we don't do that is not because just of the legibility of the pixel. I can't read what that is unless I make it really huge, but there's ways to do that. I think it's more along the lines of there is a UX decision boundary there. It's cumbersome. XR in general has terrible UX. And things like what Fabian is doing, we need more versatile and more varied workflows and environments. Because like what he was saying, when I'm at my desk, I have my drawers, I have Post-it notes, I have pencil and pen, I have my phone, I have my computer, and on my computer I also have 100 different ways to organize things. I have apps, even in my browser I have the bookmarks bar, I have the bookmarks list, I have tabs, I have tab groups, I have favorites. There's a billion different ways for me to use 1 or 2 clicks to get to exactly what I want to do and then manipulate that and move it from one place to another. You cannot do that in XR right now, and that's why nobody uses it.
We're working on it. We're working on it.
We truly are, and that's why all of this has to be real data. We have a format we call the Vision, which is just JSON with a V instead of a J, because JSON is a bit weird. Anyway, just on the reading bit, one of the very first things I built for the Vision Pro was Reader. My app. You can open a PDF and see it. The thing is, it's crystal clear. So in terms of quality of reading, it's up to me, no difference now with the updates I've had than reading it up the machine. The funny thing is that if you have a 2-page spread, it's nice, you can read it, of course it's inconvenient. But if you make it bigger, now it doesn't really help. So we have to innovate beyond the obvious of just make it bigger, you have more space. So that's it. So over to your next demonstration.
So
thank you.
while we're working on this thing,